All right, let's just jump right in. Imagine this for a second. What actually happens when the exact same network scan you use to secure a corporate system suddenly becomes the digital footprint of a federal crime? It's a crazy thought, right? Well, in today's explainer, we're going to be walking that razor thin line. We're talking about the dual use reality of digital forensics tools, and more importantly, the strict legal boundaries that govern how we use them. Welcome to reWant Courseware. Think of this as your go-to explainer series where we completely break down some really complex, cutting-edge topics. Today, we're actually unpacking the absolute latest materials from Professor Adam Scott Wandt, who you might know teaches over at the prestigious John Jay College of Criminal Justice right in New York City. We're going to be exploring that exact intersection where hardcore technical capabilities slam right into real-world law. So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the dual-use reality, then move on to Kali Linux Reconnaissance, Parrot OS forensics, the CFAA legal boundary, the Coalfire principle, and finally wrap it up with authorized workflows. All right, Section 1, the dual-use reality, security tool, or federal crime. Let's get into it. You know, our whole technical toolset here is built on a really fascinating foundation. Literally, every tool we're going to discuss today was designed to either find weaknesses in a system or entirely exploit them. And that right there is the dual-use reality. On the one hand, you've got Kali Linux, which is completely built around an offensive-first architecture. It's meant for penetration testing and comes packed with over 600 security tools to actively poke and prod at systems. But then on the flip side, we have Parrot OS. Parrot uses this hybrid dual offensive-defensive design that is totally optimized for preserving evidence. Here's the thing. In a professional fraud examination, you absolutely need both mindsets. The exact technical capability you'd use in Kali to uncover insider fraud, it's mathematically identical to the capability needed to actually commit that fraud. That's exactly why looking at these two platforms side by side is a real game changer. Moving on to Section 2, Kali Linux Offensive Reconnaissance, mapping the attack surface. Okay, so the crucial takeaway here is that Kali Linux gives you this incredibly robust arsenal for authorized network reconnaissance. And honestly, it all starts with Nmap. Nmap answers the absolute most foundational question any investigator can ask, which is simply, what actually exists on this network? By using port scanning and host discovery, Nmap essentially exposes the gap between what a company thinks is running on their network and what is actually sitting right there. It is brilliant for spotting unauthorized personal devices or rogue access points, but, and this is a massive but, Nmap isn't just sitting there passively observing, it is actively firing off packets to target hosts. So if you run Nmap on a network without explicit written authorization, you are making active contact with systems you do not own. The bottom line, Nmap is a powerhouse, for sure, but you absolutely need rock-solid legal boundaries in place before you even think about pressing enter. Right, so once you've got the network mapped out, you might actually need to test some of those vulnerabilities. And that brings us to the Metasploit framework. Metasploit is what lets a fraud examiner document whether a suspected vulnerability was actually exploitable by an insider. But listen, it has to be used so carefully. It requires a highly specific workflow. Basically, you operate inside the MSF console interface, but instead of, actually launching an attack, you only deploy auxiliary scanner modules. These little modules let you verify that a vulnerability is actually there without exploiting it or risking taking the whole system down. Like, say you want to check if a machine is vulnerable to Eternal Blue. You can check it without actually triggering the exploit itself. And finally, absolutely crucial, you've got to log every single session using the spool command. Why? Because you need to maintain a completely strict evidentiary chain of custody. Remember, you are there to document the technical feasibility of the fraud, not cause a brand new disaster. Okay, Section 3. Parrot OS Defensive Forensics, securing the digital crime scene. So while Kali pretty much assumes you're going on the attack, Parrot OS takes the totally opposite approach. It assumes you need to safely observe a target without changing a single byte of data. Parrot has this really cool feature called forensic mode. It's a live boot environment specifically designed to mount a suspect's internal drives completely read-only. What that means is it minimizes any automatic mounting and totally prevents unindented data writes. It's exactly like walking through a physical crime scene without leaving any footprints behind. This software-level block lets an examiner safely watch active processes and live network connections during that initial triage phase, all without altering the very evidence they're there to collect. Now sure, hardware write blocking is still the ultimate gold standard for formal acquisitions, but Parrot software protection, it is an absolute lifesaver when you're staring at a live system and you need to know exactly what's happening in that very second before somebody pulls the plug. And that brings us to the two main dimensions of defensive analysis inside Parrot OS, autopsy and volatility. So Autopsy gives you this massive, full graphical forensic interface. You use it for disk images, so you can parse through file systems, recover deleted files, and really build out these comprehensive timelines of a suspect's activity, going back months or even years. Volatility, on the other hand, is all about the right here, right now. It's an open-source memory forensics framework that extracts running processes, active network connections, and literally even live encryption keys right out of the volatile RAM. I mean, we are talking about evidence that just straight up doesn't exist on the hard drive and will completely vanish into thin air the second that computer powers down. When you put them together, Autopsy and Volatility give you the whole shebang, a complete picture of historical data plus the active in-the-moment system state. Moving on to Section 4, the CFAA legal boundary, the limit of technical capability. Let's talk law. I cannot stress this enough. In this field, all your technical knowledge is basically useless, and honestly, super dangerous, if you don't have the legal knowledge to back it up. Enter the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, or the CFAA. This is the primary federal statute that prohibits unauthorized computer access. It basically says you cannot access a computer without authorization, and you definitely cannot exceed whatever authorized access you do have. And the CFAA applies broadly. It does not give a free pass to well-intentioned fraud examiners. In fact, here's a pretty sobering reality check. Under the CFAA's damage provisions, an examiner could literally face criminal prosecution if a well-intentioned Metasploit model accidentally crashes a production server, and the downtime and recovery costs top just $5,000 in a single year. And the law defines damage as basically any impairment to the integrity or availability of a system. So an overly aggressive scan? Yeah, that isn't just an oopsie technical mistake. It is immense, serious legal exposure. The good news, though, is that the legal landscape is actually evolving. Back in May 2022, the U.S. Department of Justice actually revised its charging policy, and they stated that good faith security research should not be charged. This new interpretation basically clarified that prosecutors actually have to weigh the examiner's real purpose, the nature of what they were doing, and the actual realistic harm caused, not just the mere fact that they gained technical access. But hold on. Do not mistake this for a get-out-of-jail-free card. This policy does not grant you automatic legal immunity. All it does is distinguish authorized, good faith work from actual criminal conduct. To safely stay inside the protected zone, you absolutely still need strict, explicit, written authorization before you even think about running a single scan.
All right, Section 5, the Coalfire Authorization Principle, the gap in legal protection.
$600,000. Let that sink in. That is the actual settlement amount paid out to two wrongfully jailed Coalfire penetration testers. Back in 2019, these two highly trained security professionals were just doing an authorized physical pen test at an Iowa courthouse. They had a signed contract, they had explicit written authorization directly from the state judicial branch. And yet, they were arrested, literally charged with felony burglary, held overnight on a $50,000 bail each, and then dragged through prosecutions for months. And why did this massive nightmare happen? Because even though they had exactly what the industry considers proper authorization, there was a huge real-world communication gap. It is pretty much the perfect, albeit terrifying, example of accidentally committing a felony while literally just trying to do your job. And that insane case birthed what we now call the Coalfire principle, which is this. Authorization from one party does not automatically give you authorization against all parties. Think about it. Those testers had state judicial permission to physically test the courthouse, right? But they got arrested because the county sheriff, who shared jurisdiction over that exact same building, was completely left in the dark about the engagement. As an examiner, you might have written permission from the CEO to scan a network, but if you don't coordinate with the IT staff, the third-party cloud providers, or even local law enforcement in some cases, you could easily end up facing obstruction charges or massive civil claims. Real comprehensive authorization means communicating the exact scope of your engagement to literally everyone who genuinely needs to know about it. Which brings us to our final part, Section 6, Authorized Examination Workflows, the legally bulletproof checklist. So, to safely walk this razor's edge without falling off, digital forensic examiners have to rely on incredibly strict, well-documented workflows. For example, a legally defensible forensic boot has to follow a very specific sequence. First, in a matter of seconds, you boot into Parrot's forensic mode to instantly stop any data writes. Then, over the next few minutes, you're doing live triage and capturing the exact network state. After that, and this is super critical, you immediately jump into memory acquisition using tools like LIM. Why the rush? Because RAM is incredibly volatile. The very instant someone shuts that computer down, every running process, every network connection, and all those unencrypted keys floating in memory are just gone forever. Poof.
Only after that volatile of memory is totally locked down do you sit back and spend the hours needed for full disk imaging. It's a workflow entirely driven by how fast evidence can disappear.
And that perfectly leads us to the pre-engagement authorization checklist. Listen, before you launch a single one of those technical tools we talked about, you need the explicit identity of the authorizing party. You need a razor-sharp scope definition. We're talking exact IP addresses and host names. You need a highly specific list of permitted techniques. Just saying network examination doesn't cut it. It needs to literally say nmap host discovery. You also need a strictly defined time window, an emergency client contact just in case you accidentally stumble onto an active live breach, and you absolutely must have confirmed third-party notifications to avoid ending up in a Coalfire situation. If you get a negative answer to even one item on this list, the entire examination has to halt immediately. Skipping these steps isn't a shortcut. It is literally just accepting personal criminal liability. So I'll leave you with this to chew on. Does your current authorization perfectly map the boundary between a standard professional examination and a federal crime? Because as we've seen today, understanding the technical tools is really only half the job. Deeply understanding the law is what actually keeps you out of jail. If you found this helpful, definitely like, follow, and subscribe for more deep dives into emerging tech, digital investigations, and the core ideas that are shaping our future. And as always, remember, stay curious and want knowledge.